Long before the nuclear age, humanity managed to set a really staggering benchmark for destruction. Yeah. And they did it purely by accident.
Yeah, it's honestly a pretty grim piece of history.
It really is. Welcome to the Deep Dive, everyone. Today we are exploring the 1917 Halifax Explosion. We're relying on a highly detailed historical overview from Wikipedia to guide us through this one.
And it is a incredibly well-documented source, which we definitely need for a topic this massive.
Right. The mission for today's deep dive is to unpack exactly how a series of, seemingly mundane, slow-motion logistical errors compounded. And they ended up creating the largest human-made explosion of its time.
It's a textbook case of things going wrong in the worst possible order.
Exactly. We want to dig through the rubble of this tragedy to extract the lessons hidden within it. Lessons about systemic failure, human resilience, and the deep social inequalities that disaster always seems to expose. Okay, let's back this.
Let's do it.
To really understand the anatomy of this disaster, you have to transport yourself back to 1917. Picture yourself standing on the shores of Halifax and Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. You are not looking at a sleepy coastal town. You are standing in the middle of a booming wartime hub.
Right, because the atmosphere of 1917 Halifax is entirely dictated by the First World War, which is just raging in Europe at this point.
Everything revolves around the war.
Exactly. The inner harbor has been totally transformed. It's the principal assembly point for merchant convoys leaving North America for Britain and France.
So it's incredibly crowded.
Oh, absolutely packed. The local population has swelled massively, up to over 60,000 people. You've got soldiers, sailors, merchants, factory workers, all crammed into this bustling port. The weight of goods passing through the harbor has increased nearly ninefold.
Ninefold? That is insane.
Yeah. The city is operating under immense logistical pressure, and that pressure fundamentally alters how people and ships behave.
Because the convoy system itself acts as this massive pressure cooker. The Allies mandate that ships must travel together under the protection of British cruisers and destroyers. This is because of the very real threat of German U-boats hunting in the Atlantic.
They couldn't risk ships going out alone.
Exactly. So to keep these ships safe while they gather and wait for their escorts, they anchor in the Bedford Basin, which is located at the northwestern end of the harbor. But here is where the bottleneck happens.
The nets.
Yes, the anti-submarine nets. They protect the basin, but they are raised every single night. If a ship misses that window, they are locked in or locked out until dawn.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can see a classic Swiss cheese model of disaster taking shape.
I love that concept.
Okay.
Can you explain the Swiss cheese model for those who might not know?
Sure. In risk management, this model describes how major accidents occur only when the holes in multiple overlapping layers of defense temporarily align.
Like slices of Swiss cheese stacked up.
Exactly. Normally, a mistake is caught by the next layer of defense. But if the holes align, the hazard slips right through. The first hole in our model here is the erosion of standard safety protocols due to that wartime urgency we just talked about.
Because before the war, there were strict rules.
Very strict. Ships carrying highly dangerous explosive cargo were absolutely forbidden from entering the inner harbor. But the risk of losing those vital munitions to submarines in open water was deemed too great by 1917.
So they relaxed the regulations.
They did. They allowed floating bombs right into the heart of a densely populated city.
Wow. And sailing right through those aligning holes are our two main players. The first is the SS IMO. This is a Norwegian ship chartered by the Commission for Relief in Belgium.
And it's important to note that IMO is entirely empty of cargo at this point.
Right, which means the ship is sitting remarkably high up in the water. That physics detail becomes crucial later. They were supposed to leave the day before, but a delayed coal delivery forced them to wait. By the time they were fueled up, the anti-submarine nets had been raised for the night.
So they're stuck.
The crew is stuck in the basin, highly frustrated, and absolutely desperate to make up for lost time the next morning.
And on the other side of those nets is our second player, the SS Mont Blanc. This is a French cargo ship.
And its manifest is terrifying.
Terrifying is the right word. It's a cocktail of high explosives. The hold is packed with TNT, picric acid, highly flammable benzol fuel, and gun cotton.
Just a staggering amount of volatile material.
The Mont Blanc arrived from New York late on December 5th, hoping to join a convoy. But just like the IMO, it missed the window before the nets were raised.
So you have this incredibly tense setup, an empty ship trying to get out, and a ship packed to the brim with explosives trying to get in. Both are anchored, just waiting for the sun to rise on December 6th.
The chronological sequence of that morning unfolds with an agonizing, slow-motion inevitability. When the anti-submarine nets finally open, the IMO gets clearance to leave the Bedford Basin.
And they are in a rush.
They are driven by that pent-up frustration from their delay. They enter the Narrows, which is the strait connecting the basin to the harbor, and they are traveling well above the strict harbor speed limit of 5 knots.
That excessive speed immediately forces them into a sequence of evasive maneuvers, right?
Yeah. They encounter an American steamer, the Clara, traveling up the wrong side of the channel. This forces the IMO to alter its course to the western side.
Which is the completely wrong side for an outbound ship.
Exactly. And moments later, they have to dodge a tugboat called the Stella Maris. That pushes the IMO even further out of its proper lane and dangerously close to the Dartmouth shore.
Meanwhile, heading inbound through the Narrows is the Mont Blanc. It's being guided by Francis Mackey, a highly experienced harbor pilot.
Mackey knows exactly what kind of doomsday cargo is sitting beneath his feet. He had actually explicitly requested a special guard ship to escort the Mont Blanc through the harbor.
But the authorities denied it.
They denied it. So operating with extreme caution, Mackey spots the speeding IMO about 3/4 of a mile away. The geometry of the situation is immediately alarming to him.
Because the IMO is bearing down the wrong side of the Narrows, cutting directly into the Mont Blanc's established path.
Right. And the communication breakdown that follows really highlights the rigid, sometimes fatal nature of maritime signaling. Mackey blows one short blast of his ship's whistle.
Which means what, exactly?
It clearly signals his right-of-way and his intention to maintain his course on the starboard side.
But the IMO responds with 2 short blasts.
Which is a flat refusal to yield its position.
It's just wild. You're watching 2 massive pieces of steel moving at barely 1 knot, trapped in a highly confined waterway. And neither vessel is willing or able to correct the fatal geometry in time.
Mackey takes the only evasive action he feels is safe. He cuts the engines on the Mont Blanc, angles slightly closer to the Dartmouth shore, and blows another single blast. He is practically begging the IMO to correct its course.
And the IMO stubbornly responds with another double blast.
Sailors on nearby ships actually gather on their decks to watch this bizarre standoff. Both ships have cut their engines at this point, but their immense forward momentum just continues to carry them toward each other.
Mackey is terrified of grounding the Mont Blanc, right? Because hitting the shoreline could set off the volatile explosives just through the physical shock.
Exactly. So in the last possible second, he steers hard to port, attempting to cross the bow of the IMO to avoid a direct head-on collision.
And the maneuver almost succeeds in bringing the ships parallel. But the crew of the IMO signals 3 blasts. They throw their engines into reverse, and this initiates a fatal consequence of maritime physics.
Because the IMO is completely empty of cargo and sitting so high in the water, the transverse thrust of its right-hand propeller acts differently than it would on a burdened ship.
As the engines reverse, the thrust violently swings the ship's prow sideways.
Yes. The head of the IMO arcs directly into the starboard side of the Mont Blanc. It's 8:45 a.m. The structural damage from the collision itself is actually relatively minor.
But the impact topples the barrels of benzol stored in the Mont Blanc's deck.
That highly flammable benzol spills across the deck and pours straight down into the cargo hold. As the IMO's engines continue to pull the ship out of the gash it just created, the grinding of metal against metal generates a shower of sparks.
And the benzol vapors instantly ignite.
A fire starts at the waterline and races right up the side of the French ship.
The crew of the Mont Blanc knows precisely what is going to happen next. They frantically lower their lifeboats and abandon ship, rowing desperately for the Dartmouth shore.
They're screaming warnings to the surrounding vessels, but the deafening roar of the fire completely drowns out their voices. No one can hear them.
So the burning Mont Blanc is left to drift aimlessly until it beaches itself at Pier 6 on the Halifax side. The spectacle of a massive ship on fire in the harbor naturally draws hundreds of Halifax citizens out of their homes.
They gather on the streets, they stand on the docks, they press their faces against their glass windows to watch the flames. They are completely unaware of the cataclysm sitting in the cargo hold. It's so tragic. Out on the water, the crew of that tugboat we mentioned earlier, the Stella Maris, they anchor their barges and steam directly toward Pier 6. Realizing their hoses are useless against a fire of this magnitude, they start trying to attach a 10-inch hawser line to the Mont Blanc to tow it away from the densely populated pier.
They never managed to secure that line. At exactly 9:04 and 35 seconds a.m., the fire breaches the high explosives.
The resulting detonation completely vaporizes the Mont Blanc.
To really grasp the sheer scale of the blast, you have to look at the physics. Temperatures at the center of the explosion instantly reach 5,000 degrees Celsius.
That is essentially the surface of the sun.
It's incomprehensible. A catastrophic blast wave radiates outward at a speed of over 1,000 meters per second. The energy released is equivalent to roughly 2.9 kilotons of TNT.
And the historical context of that number is staggering. Decades later, when the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, the destructive power of that new weapon was contextualized for the public by stating it was 7 times the power of the Halifax Explosion. Halifax became the enduring, grim metric for absolute devastation.
The environmental impact alone is hard to visualize. The explosion vaporizes the water immediately surrounding the ship. It momentarily exposes the actual floor of the harbor.
And when the displaced ocean rushes back in to fill that massive void, it generates an 18-meter tsunami. That 60-foot wall of water picks up the massive SS IMO and washes it completely ashore on the Dartmouth side.
Yet, within this incomprehensible destruction, you find profound instances of duty, most notably in the story of railway dispatcher Vince Coleman.
Coleman's story is incredible. He is working in the rail yard just 750 feet from Pier 6. When the fire starts, a sailor informs him and a co-worker about the explosives.
As they begin to flee, Coleman realizes that an overnight passenger train carrying 300 people from St. John, New Brunswick is scheduled to arrive at that exact rail yard within minutes.
He makes the conscious decision to turn back. He returns to his telegraph key alone to stop the incoming trains.
The stoicism in his final message is just remarkable. He doesn't send a panic plea. He sends a clear, calculated warning to save others while accepting his own fate. The exact telegraph from the source reads, "Hold up the train, ammunition ship a fire in harbor making for Pier 6 and will explode. Guess this will be my last message. Goodbye, boys."
That single message halts all incoming trains around Halifax. It stops that specific passenger train at a safe distance and saves all 300 lives on board.
His warning also echoes down the rail lines, triggering the immediate mobilization of relief trains from other cities. Coleman is killed at his post the very moment the blast hits.
The immediate aftermath of the shockwave leaves 1,782 people confirmed dead and roughly 9,000 more injured. Over 1.6 square kilometers of Halifax are obliterated.
And the time of year plays a really cruel role in the rising death toll.
It does. Because it is a cold December morning, residents have their winter stoves burning. When the blast wave flattens the wooden houses, those heavy stoves overturn. They ignite the splintered wreckage and trap surviving residents in secondary fires.
The sensory details recorded by survivors paint a grim picture of those first few minutes. There's an account from firefighter Billy Wells. He is blown through the air by the shockwave and survives as the only living member of the Patricia fire engine crew.
The things he witnessed were horrific.
He notes the sights upon standing up, describing people hanging out of windows dead, some with missing limbs, and bodies thrown entirely onto the overhead telegraph wires.
Yet the pivot to rescue operations is instantaneous. Surviving neighbors dig through the rubble with their bare hands. Military personnel, surviving railway workers, and crews from ships in the port like the American cruiser USS Tacoma and the steamship Old Colony, they immediately abandon their wartime duties.
They launch a massive triage and rescue operation, converting spaces like the local YMCA into emergency hospitals.
Then nature introduces a massive complication. The very next day, a severe blizzard strikes Halifax.
Just a devastating twist of fate.
It drops 16 inches of heavy snow on the ruined city. This stalls the vital rescue trains pushing up from the United States and central Canada. It subjects the newly homeless survivors to freezing conditions.
However, the heavy snowfall does serve one critical life-saving function. It smothers and extinguishes the citywide fires that the surviving fire department was entirely unequipped to fight.
What's fascinating here is how the specific nature of the injuries sustained during the blast forces long-term innovations in the medical field.
The injuries are heavily dictated by where people were when the bomb went off, right?
Exactly. Because so many citizens were standing at their windows watching the burning ship, The shock waves shattered thousands of panes of glass directly into their faces.
The sheer volume of massive permanent eye injuries completely overwhelms the responding ophthalmologists. They are forced to perform 249 enucleations. That is the surgical removal of an eye.
The sudden creation of a massive visually impaired population forces Halifax to innovate its long-term care strategies. Ultimately, it leads the city to become an international center for blind care.
This tragedy is intimately tied to the foundation of the Canadian National Institute for the Blind, or CNIB.
And the medical legacy extends beyond eye care. A surgeon from Boston named Dr. William Ladd arrives in the aftermath to assist with the relief effort. He is struck by the severe lack of coordinated pediatric care.
Because at the time, children injured in disasters were largely treated as miniature adults.
Which is medically ineffective. Dr. Ladd's experience treating the unique traumas of thousands of injured children in Halifax directly inspires him to pioneer the distinct medical specialty of pediatric surgery in North America.
The medical community extracts vital progress from the overwhelming triage of the disaster. But here's where it gets really interesting, because the physical reconstruction of the city exposes the deep pre-existing social inequalities of 1917.
When we look at how 3 different communities are treated in the aftermath, a stark map of systemic prejudice emerges.
Let's start with the working-class neighborhood of Richmond, which bore the absolute brunt of the explosion. The Halifax Relief Commission approaches the destruction of Richmond as a blank slate for modern urban planning.
They bring in Thomas Adams, a prominent English town planner, to redesign the area. Richmond is rebuilt using fireproof compressed cement blocks known as Hydrostone.
It is designed with tree-lined boulevards and ample green spaces. Today, the Hydrostone remains a thriving upscale neighborhood. It's a testament to progressive recovery efforts.
But you see a drastically different approach when you look at the Mi'kmaq settlement of Turtle Grove.
This indigenous community is located in Tufts Cove, situated perilously close to the epicenter of the blast.
The explosion and the subsequent 18-meter tsunami completely obliterate the settlement. The Mi'kmaq residents who survived the blast are left with absolutely nothing.
And rather than rebuilding their community, the relief effort places the indigenous survivors in racially segregated, substandard conditions.
They are eventually dispersed across the province, and Turtle Grove is never rebuilt. The disaster essentially finalizes a displacement that the government had been attempting to enforce prior to the explosion.
The systemic neglect is just as evident in Africville, a black community located on the shores of the Bedford Basin.
The topography of the land actually provides Africville with a shadow effect, sparing it from the direct, flattening force of the blast.
However, their homes are frail, and the shockwave still causes severe structural damage and the deaths of 5 residents. The citizens of Africville pay city taxes, yet they are systematically denied relief funds.
They receive none of the progressive reconstruction afforded to Richmond. They are denied basic infrastructure like water mains and sewer lines, and are even refused police and fire protection.
The combination of persistent racism and the city's desire to eventually use the Africville land for industrial development means the community is entirely left to fend for itself in the wake of the disaster. It's a sobering reality check on how relief is distributed.
The human response to the disaster is deeply prejudiced across the board, and that prejudice heavily influences the immediate search for a scapegoat.
Naturally, when a vital port city explodes during a global war, the immediate public assumption is sabotage. Paranoia runs rampant.
Citizens suspect German agents or Zeppelin attacks. This hysteria leads to the arrest of the SS IMO's Norwegian helmsman while he is receiving medical treatment for severe injuries.
And the justification for his arrest is almost absurd. A letter found in his pocket is mistaken for German by authorities when it is simply written in Norwegian.
The official judicial response, known as the Rec Commissioner's Inquiry, also falls victim to heavy biases. The inquiry is presided over by Justice Arthur Drysdale.
Local sentiment in Halifax at the time is fiercely anti-French, and Drysdale's inquiry reflects that animosity.
He initially places the blame for the disaster entirely on the French captain of the Mont Blanc, Aimé Lemedec, the local pilot Francis Mackey, and a Royal Canadian Navy commander in charge of harbor defenses.
The initial findings even lead to charges of manslaughter.
But the legal battles continue long after the dust settles. Eventually, the Supreme Court of Canada and the Privy Council in London intervene to review the navigational facts.
They examine the rigid convoy rules, the speeding of the IMO, the whistle blasts, and the failure to yield.
The higher courts rule that the disaster is a 50-50 shared blame between the Mont Blanc and the IMO.
Huh.
Ultimately, no individual is ever convicted of a crime.
The disaster is legally recognized as a compounding series of systemic and navigational errors rather than malicious intent.
Out of all the blame, paranoia, and devastation, there is one enduring legacy that highlights profound human cooperation.
The immediate response from the United States, specifically the state of Massachusetts and the city of Boston, is absolutely vital to Halifax's survival. Boston mobilizes immense medical and relief aid.
They send trains packed with doctors, nurses, and supplies straight through the blinding snowstorm to reach the ruined city.
To express their gratitude for that life-saving intervention, the province of Nova Scotia sends a giant Christmas tree to Boston in 1918.
That tradition of gratitude is formally revived in 1971 and remains unbroken to this day. Every single year, the Nova Scotia government handpicks a massive Christmas tree and sends it down to Boston.
It serves as Boston's official Christmas tree on the Boston Common. It is a permanent, living symbol of the enduring friendship between the two cities, forged in the darkest possible circumstances.
When you look back at the sequence of events, you see a masterclass in how disasters are born and how they permanently alter the world.
We've traced the journey from a bustling wartime port, buckling under logistical strain, to a slow-motion collision governed by the unforgiving physics of transverse thrust, to a detonation that briefly exposed the floor of the ocean.
We've seen how the stoicism of individuals like Vince Coleman saved hundreds, how the medical innovations of Dr. Ladd and the founders of the CNIB changed global healthcare.
And how the rebuilding process starkly highlighted the racial and economic divides of the era. The Halifax explosion serves as a grim catalyst for modern society.
The sheer scale of the 2.9 kiloton blast fundamentally forced changes in global maritime law, specifically regarding the transport and handling of hazardous materials in populated areas.
It revolutionized approaches to urban town planning, as demonstrated by the Hydrostone neighborhood. Disasters of this magnitude burn away outdated systems, forcing society to adapt its laws, its cities, and its medicine to ensure such a localized apocalypse never happens again.
Yet, adaptation and healing are complex, and sometimes the community finds the trauma too profound to acknowledge immediately.
For decades following the first anniversary of the explosion, the city of Halifax largely suppressed the memory of the event. Official commemorations were completely halted.
It wasn't until the 50th anniversary in 1967 that the city officially gathered to mourn the dead and acknowledge the scale of what they had survived.
Which leaves you with a final thought to mull over today as we wrap up this deep dive. Why do societies sometimes choose collective amnesia over collective mourning after a massive trauma? And what is the long-term cost to a community when it finally forces itself to remember the scars it tried so hard to bury?